Hi, I'm Dr. John Neufeld. You're watching Back to the Bible Canada. Thank you for joining me today. I have started a new series on the life of David, not David as the king, but rather David from being a shepherd all the way to becoming a warrior, which, as we know, would eventually lead him to becoming a hunted man, which would eventually lead him to becoming a king. And not just a king, but the greatest king Israel ever knew, and also as the individual who would set the stage for the coming of the Messiah into the world. So David's a very important individual, so that's our start. But today, I'm going to talk about God choosing our calling. You know, one of the things that Christians sometimes struggle with is, what is the will of God in some very practical matters in our lives? And I remember it was, I don't know how many years ago now, I was preaching in a church and they announced that on Sunday I was preaching, they were going to actually have the decision for a new deacon. So I suspected they were going to have a vote during the Sunday service, but that's not what happened. In fact, what they announced was that the church had approved a group of people and they had placed every single name in a bag, and then the bag was shaken and one of the leaders came and put his hand in and selected one person at random and said, "The Lord has chosen," and then they announced the name of their new deacon. I thought about that a lot afterwards, and I was of two minds, and here's what I thought. See, on the one hand, I could have said, look, there's actually biblical precedence for that. You know, if you know what the high priest looked like at the time of the Old Testament, you know that he wore what's called a Urim and a Thummim, which was roughly equivalent to casting lots. And look, God's not just sovereign, God is meticulously sovereign. That's why Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is of the Lord." So God directs even the smallest things. So why can't God direct the names that were put into that bag and who was selected out of that? So that was one of the ways that I had thinking. I had no doubt that God could use that kind of a system. Now I had other thoughts as well. And I thought, on the other hand, the New Testament actually never commands that kind of an approach to selecting leadership. I know in the book of Acts that they actually choose the 12th apostle after Judas, flamed out, shall we say, and went to his place of destruction, that they replaced him with a man named Matthias, and they actually, put his, they had two people they put in there, and they chose them by lot. So in that sense, it was done once, but it doesn't seem like it was ever done that way again. As far as we look at the New Testament, in the book of 1 Timothy and in Titus, there are a list given of the credentials that one should look for in a leadership, and one should make a reasoned, careful, discerning approach to choosing leaders. Now, I mention all of that, and not because I want to pass judgment on, whether or not the church was right or wrong in putting the names into a bag. I have no judgment on that whatsoever. What I do say is that it highlights for me some of the difficulties that Christians sometimes have in saying, God, what is your will for my life in this given situation? And I would say that most obedient Christians are placed in either one of two categories. Number one, they will say, there are those who simply say, look, I am going to, as best as I can, with the wisdom that God has given me, choose as wisely as I can between the decisions I have to make, and I'm going to simply pray this way. Lord, it seems to me I can glorify you by doing decision X. And that's the way that I'm going. However, if you don't want that for me, simply intervene along the way and stop me. So there are lots of believers. That's how they go about making decisions. They choose what they believe is the wisest, most profitable, God-glorifying thing, and then just leave it to the Lord. He can always direct our course. And yet there are others that say, Lord, give me a sign in some way, show me in something, so that I might know this is the way that you want me to go. So, which one of those is right? And again, I'm not making a choice here. I'm simply pointing these matters out. But I want to also add something else, and it's this. In so many things in our lives, even the big things, we actually had no choice at all. Did you have a choice in terms of who your parents would be, who would raise you and disciple you and discipline you? as you became an adult. You had no choice in that matter, but think of how weighty that was. God chose that for you. You did not choose that. And there are so many other choices as well. So I'm going to say that when it comes to David, who would eventually become the king of Israel, it was not his choice. He didn't say, Lord, show me the direction for my life. Far as we know, he never prayed that prayer. Here's what happened to David. Samuel, the prophet, simply showed up at his house, not his house, but his family home, and announced God's intention regarding his life. Some of us wish it would be like that. I mean, God, send a prophet to my door and tell me what I'm supposed to do with my life. And yet, our experience, I'm going to say, even though it's going to be different than David's, in many ways, there's so much to learn from what actually happened to him. And I'll be announcing what those life lessons can look like. But we're studying 1 Samuel chapter 14 and following. And we're tracing David's rise to kingship, at least the rise from him being a shepherd to being, a mighty warrior who's on his way to becoming the king. And we're going to examine his call. David's call is interesting. Now, in the Old Testament, Abraham receives a very direct call. God speaks to him and says, leave your country, leave your family, leave your household, go to the land I'll show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I'll bless all the families of the earth through you. That's the call of God to Abraham. You think about God's call in Moses, a burning bush in the desert, and God says, I've chosen you. You go to Egypt, and you lead my people out of slavery. See, it's very dramatic. David has a call too. But his call only comes to him very directly when he's already been a king. And in 2 Samuel chapter 7, God finally announces why he's brought David to that office. David didn't know until that point in time. In fact, the things just seemed to tumble in onto his life, and only later did he come to understand God's purpose. So in many ways, you could look at David's life, and many faithful believers might interpret the events of their life through the kind of lens that David provides us. That down the road, as we see God's action in our lives, we look back at it and we say, yeah, that was God leading me the whole way, and it now becomes overwhelmingly clear to us. So let's start with 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. It says, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over King Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. Now, again, we notice that David has no part. He doesn't know this is going on. He's just a kid. He's out taking care of the sheep in his dad's business, in his dad's farming business. David's the youngest. There are 8 brothers. He's the youngest of all of them. And he has no part in what's going on. Forces much bigger than him are converging, and they will sweep him up. So it's a horrible turn of event. God has rejected King Saul, and now he is directing Samuel to find the next king. And when I think about that, I think about Proverbs 16, verse 9. It says, the mind of man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. I mean, it may be that your life takes upon itself a direction that you had never intended. I know that's how it was for me. I did not start in my Christian life desiring to be a pastor or a Christian leader or even a Bible teacher. I did not desire that. I was looking forward to a life in either business or taking over the family farm, and that was the life that God had for me. In fact, in my own conversion, I said to the Lord, I'll follow you everywhere. You have my life, take it all. I said, but one thing, I've observed the pastors in my life. I don't want to be one. Please don't make me one. And I ended up being one for 35 years. That surprised me. It didn't surprise the Lord. God simply swept me up. And that's what I want to say sometimes happens in our lives. So David is the youngest of 7 brothers. And that's going to, he has 7 brothers. There's 8 boys in the family. And at God's direction, God directs this prophet Samuel, who is the leader in the country, the spiritual leader in the country, and he shows up at the house of a man by the name of Jesse. And if you know the book of Ruth, you'll know about Jesse's great-grandfather and his great-grandmother. And it's Ruth and it's Boaz. And this couple would have left a very godly legacy in their family. And I have no doubt that Jesse would have inherited a very godly legacy in his family. Now, perhaps Samuel knew something about them. Perhaps he and Jesse had met at some point in time. It seems likely to me that they must have, because Samuel doesn't ask the Lord, who in the world is Jesse? Go to the house of Jesse the Bethlehemite, and you go there and you anoint one of his sons as the next king of Israel. That's what Samuel hears. He doesn't say, never heard of Jesse. He goes straight to Bethlehem and he finds Jesse. So he must have known of him. I would imagine he's probably met him, but I also would have imagined that Samuel has never met his family, because Samuel seems unaware of how many children Jesse has or what they look like. And so it seems clear that Samuel has not been thinking about Jesse or contemplating, maybe one of this guy's kids is a replacement for King Saul. This has come directly from God, and it's surprising to Samuel. And when the word comes, Samuel at first hesitates, not out of disobedience, but out of fear. He wonders how he's going to pull this thing off, because if Saul, who is the king, hears what Samuel is about, well, let me read to you what it says. Samuel said, that is to God, how can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me. And indeed, we're beginning to recognize that something is happening. I mean, Saul starts his life as king, as an obedient king, and he looks like he is the future of Israel. But as time goes by, he becomes more unhinged, shall we say. He becomes temperamental, insanely jealous. He's ready to take revenge on anyone who crosses his path. He's not interested in blessing the nation. He's interested in defending himself. That sometimes happens to a political leader. They start out well, they become horrible down the road. That is Saul's legacy that he left. In fact, later on in 1 Samuel chapter 22, we find that David, who is now on the run from Saul because Saul is trying to kill him, David stops in a village called Nob. And in Nob, there are some priests there, and they help David on their way. They don't know what David is doing or how he's running from Saul. So Saul hears that he got food in Nob from the priests. So he goes into Nob, and he has all the priests of Nob slaughtered. So you get a sense of Saul. He will now kill at the drop of a hat, and Samuel has an inkling that's what the king will do. So he says to God, if I just go there, I'm going to be killed in an instant. And so I'm reading here from 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 2 to 3. And the Lord said, that is to Samuel, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me him whom I declare to you. Now, some people are troubled about that, and they say, well, wait a minute. It sounds like God is telling Samuel, his prophet, to lie. And I'd like to say that Samuel's not lying at all, and God's not inciting him to lie, but God is telling Samuel, conceal your purpose. Now, remember, Samuel's a Levitical judge, and as a Levitical judge, he would be authorized by the law of Moses to offer a sacrificial animal in any city to atone for an unsolved murder in that region. Now, there may have been, the text doesn't tell us, but there might have been such case in Bethlehem, and we are not told, but clearly he's going to perform duties that he must perform as a priest and as a prophet. And for some reason, we don't now know why, but his coming to Bethlehem raises concerns, and that's what verse 4 says. I'm reading verse 4. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peacefully? And you think, oh my, what's actually happening here? Well, we don't know, but let's say I'm right. Let's say he comes to sacrifice because of an unsolved murder in the city or in the surrounding countryside. Now, Bethlehem wouldn't have been a large place, and it seems likely to believe that if there's an unsolved murder there, that somebody would have known and didn't come forward. So maybe the elders of the city are concerned because the prophet is coming and saying, look, you as a city, you've been protecting someone, and I come with justice. Now, that's a possibility of why they were so afraid of his coming. I mean, another possibility is Samuel himself had just put to death King Agag of the Amalekites, and then Samuel had announced God's displeasure on the disobedient actions of King Saul, and had not held back, and had announced judgment on Saul. And it might be that the citizens of Bethlehem have said, look, as a prophet, he comes to point out disobedience and lawbreaking and something of that in the city, and we're afraid. So at any rate, Samuel comes and assures them he means no ill, and he's got no bad words for anyone. And so he comes to the city, and they have a ceremony, and animals are sacrificed, and Jesse and his sons, with the exception of David. Now hear this. Jesse and his sons come, but they don't bring David. So where's David at this point in time? Well, the answer is because he's the youngest guy doesn't get invited, but he is told, get to work, get back into the pasture, make sure that you're taking care of the sheep. So he's left behind because he's not important enough. Now, if you know anything about, how, the birth order worked in an ancient Jewish family, the oldest son would inherit one half of the father's wealth, and the others would have to divide whatever remains between them. So, it's an interesting thing. And so, David as the youngest is not considered significant in the family. I'm sure he was loved, but I'm also sure that because of birth order, his place was always going to be last. That was just the lot that was assigned to him. And then what happens next is, it's confusing to some of us. Samuel calls for all of Jesse's sons to stand before him. So does Jesse know what Samuel's about at that point in time? Why is he asking that? And I don't think Jesse knows. I think that Jesse must have thought, look, Samuel is looking in some way to bless one of my sons. I mean, maybe a special anointing will come on my son for a given purpose. But as for what that purpose would be, Jesse's, I think, in the dark at this point in time. But nonetheless, he thinks it's a great honor. And so, as is customary, he would have brought his sons, the oldest one first. And the oldest one is a son by the name of Eliab. He's the oldest. He inherits the major part of the father's estate, the remaining divided up, as I've said, and so Eliab comes. He's tall, he's handsome, and he bears himself with confidence. And Samuel is deciding he's not going to act until God shows him what to do. But as he looks at Eliab, he says, surely the Lord's anointed, verse 7 of our chapter, verse 6, the Lord's anointed stands among us. This is surely him. I just tell by looking at this guy, he's got leadership written all over him. This has got to be the king. Well, verse 7, God speaks and says, do not look at his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him, it says. It's a fascinating thing. I have rejected him. I find that fascinating because, from my vantage point, it would seem right to say, look, I haven't chosen him, but that's not how it's worded. God says, I have rejected him, and then comes the explanation. The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Yeah, God looks at the heart. So the heart, what is that? Well, that's the expression of the person's thoughts, their emotions, what they love and what they hate, what motivates them to act, what motivates them to refrain from action. It's the internal place out of which all the direction in a person's life is formed. And what we know about Eliab from later, in 1 Samuel 17, when Goliath shows up. And Goliath is mocking the armies of God, and Eliab simply stands, takes no action, no leadership, And when David takes leadership, Eliab is furious with his kid brother, and he has no ability to see God's calling on his kid brother's life. He simply discounts it. Eliab is a man who I think plays it safe and is not a man of faith. God sees it. God sees it. Remember, we're talking about life lessons to be learned from David. So what's the first life lesson that we learn? God is not searching for your abilities. He's searching for your heart. Get your heart right with God. Say, change my heart, O God. Ask the Lord to give you a desire for the things of God above all other things so that you might delight in the things of God. There is no greater thing that you can do with your life than to find your heart in tune with the heart of God. Be a man, as David was, after God's own heart. That's the first life lesson. You know, I love what David would later write in Psalm 20, verses 7 and 8. He said, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They will collapse and fall, but we rise and stand upright. That is to say, it's because we trust in God, not anything else. There's where our confidence is. So, you know, the greatest task that we have is to trust in God. So anyway, Jesse's 7 sons pass. And each occasion, God says, no, I've rejected that one as well. And so Samuel's undeterred, and he said to Jesse in verse 11, are all your sons here? And he finds out now there's the runt of the litter. He's the last guy. And he's out, he's doing chores. I mean, that's why he's not here. He's not that important. He's insignificant. And Samuel says, look, we're not going to do anything else until that kid shows up. And of course, when he shows up, Samuel immediately hears the voice of God, rise and anoint him. There's the next king of Israel, says God. So here's our first life lesson was, you know, get your heart right with God. That's the biggest challenge that you have in your life. Love the things of God beyond all other things. Ask the Holy Spirit to make you new in your heart. You know, so that's number one. But number two, even if you're excluded from every single function, as David was at that most important meal, God's plans for your life won't fail because men exclude you. Do you know that? See, that's a second life lesson. Ephesians 1, verse 11. God works all things according to the counsel of His will. You know, trust God rather than, wring your hands and say, I'm being excluded and I never got this chance and I wasn't born with a golden spoon in my mouth like that other guy was, or, everything else that we tell God that we're dissatisfied with. Stop that. Stop it immediately. Get your heart right with God and know this, that God's plans in your life will not fail if they're God's plans. If they're God's plans, if the whole world wants to subvert God's plans, the whole world will fail and God will succeed. Put your trust in God. Now, according to 1 Samuel 16, verse 12, our first physical description of David. So let's see if I can find it. It says, verse 12, and he sent and brought him. So they brought David in. He was ruddy. He had beautiful eyes, strange thing to say about a guy, and he was handsome. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him. That's him. So he's a good-looking guy. He's strong, and we know that later on because he will say that at one point in time, when he was taking care of the sheep were attacked by a bear, another time a lion, and in both times he was able to kill those two beasts. I mean, this guy was committed to doing what his dad wanted him to do. That was, job one in his life. If his dad gave him a command, he'd do it. See, he'd do it as it unto the Lord. Just simply, involve yourself in those things that God has given you. So that's the idea. Okay. So now we come to something else that happens in this text, and I want you to see it. See, not only does David have a heart that pursues God, not only is he involved in doing those things that God wants him to do, not concerned that if he's excluded from something, that doesn't stop God's plans in his life. But here's the third thing, the third lesson: you may follow God's calling for your life to your own ruin if your heart is not set on God. So let me give you a little similarity between David and King Saul. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13. So getting back to verse 12, and he, that is his dad, sent and brought him, David, in. He was ruddy and beautiful eyes and, handsome. And the Lord said, that is to Samuel, arise, anoint him. This is the one. This is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. The Spirit of the Lord rushed on David. That is, God's Spirit came upon him for the task that God had given him to do. Now, the reason I make much of this is because I want you to go back with me. If you have a Bible, go all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 10, and let me tell you about the selection of David's predecessor, King Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1, it says, Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him and said, Has not the Lord anointed you to be prince over his people Israel? And you shall reign over the people of the Lord, and you shall save them from their enemies. Now go down to verse 6 of that same chapter. It says, Then the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you. And that's what happened. God's Spirit rushed upon Saul and designated him for his task. That's exactly what happened to David. And yet the outcome of those two lives is so different. See, God may equip you for a task, but if your heart, if the inner recesses of your being doesn't love God beyond all other things, if you're not humble, if you're not seeking His purposes rather than your own, then the Spirit of God equipping you for a task will ruin you as it did Saul, or it will bring great blessing to the people of God as it did David. See, here's the point of the whole thing. I'm going to say something that may shock many of you who are listening to me right now, but hear me out. Hell is filled with pastors. Yes, hell is filled with pastors. There are a certain individual who felt the call of God to do pastoral ministry and then ended up in disobedience and working in such a way that, canceled out every purpose of God in their lives only to their own ruin. Now, I'm going to say they weren't saved in the first place, but nonetheless, they were good at what they did. See, I know of one individual who is an apologist, defender of the faith, who was heard by millions all around the world. And when he actually died, not long after his death, all of his sexual misadventures became well known, and he brought great ruin to his reputation. And you think, wow, all the while that he was preaching to millions around the world, all the while he was carrying on this dark side of his life, this heart of sin that was deeply captivated by something that was just wrong with God. His heart was not yielded fully to God. And that brings me back to the first point. It's not whether or not God calls you to be a king or to be a shepherd out in the field somewhere. In either case, you can do fully what God has you to do. David could have stayed with the sheep all of his life and served God wonderfully had God not called him out of that. See, it's not whether you're called to great things or, in your eyes, lesser things. That's not the issue. The real issue will continue to be, is your heart yielded to God? Some of us are so captivated by certain people who have just great abilities, and we just say, wow, God must be using them, without asking this question: is their heart right with God? Do they teach the things that are true? Do they love the things that are godly, and do they hate the things that are wicked? Or are they captivated by a love of, the world, the love of money, sex, and power? Because money, sex, and power has destroyed one person after another, and so have left their lives in ruin. See, the difference between David and Saul is remarkable. Both of them were surprised to have been chosen. Both of them had the Spirit of God rush upon them for a particular task, that is, equip them for doing the work of leadership. But one was a man of God, and one was a man consumed with himself. See, the life lesson: be a man that's consumed with the things of God. Find no greater love than a love of God. And then whatever you put your hand to, God will direct you in such a way that it will bring glory to Him and will be for your lifelong good and for your eternal good as well. So that's the first life lesson from David. Be a man after the heart of God. Be a woman after the heart of God. Seek not great things. Seek the things that are of God. Content yourself with being obedient to whatever task He's given you. Content yourself with your God, and it will go well with you. Hey, God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching today, and I want to ask you to make sure that you hit the like button and also subscribe to this channel so that you can receive any further notifications of all the videos that we prepare for you. Thank you so much for being a part of Back to the Bible Canada.